He asked it loud enough for the whole range to hear. Not because he wanted an answer, because he wanted a reaction. "Hey, sweetheart, what's your MLS?" Administrative support. Laughter bounced off the corrugated steel walls of the forward training annex at Camp Ridgeline. 14 operators, 2 range safety officers, a roster full of decorated veterans, and one woman standing alone at the far end of the lane, rifle case at her feet, cap pulled low over a face that didn't flinch. She didn't answer the question. She didn't even turn around. Master Sergeant Marcus Webb of SEAL Team 8 would later say it was the silence that should have warned him. Not defiance, not posturing, just the kind of quiet that settles in before something irreversible happens. But that morning, he wasn't listening for warnings. Before we show you exactly what happened when the shooting started for real, not on the range, but downrange in the kind of terrain that separates trained from lethal, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Hit subscribe with the bell icon on, because this story doesn't end the way anyone expected, especially not Webb. The base at Camp Ridgeline sat between 2 mountain ridges in the high desert of the American Southwest, far enough from civilization that the only thing separating it from the landscape was razor wire and attitude. Used for joint force integration training, it brought together operators from different branches for combined exercises that were supposed to simulate real-world multi-unit coordination. Supposed to. In practice, it was a hierarchy contest with live ammunition. Staff Sergeant Dominique Raines arrived on a Tuesday, which was deliberately unremarkable. No escort, no briefing fanfare, just a transport van that stopped long enough for her to step out with a hardshell case, a regulation duffel, and a single piece of documentation that she handed to the checkpoint corporal without ceremony. He scanned it, blinked once, handed it back. "Welcome to Ridgeline, Staff Sergeant." She nodded and walked through the gate. Dom Raines was 31, 5'8". She moved with the economy of someone who'd learned years ago that every wasted motion was a liability. Her uniform was unremarkable, regulation green, no visible awards rack, no conversation starter patches. The only thing that stood out was the rifle case. Compact, matte black, designed to look like standard issue equipment. It wasn't. Inside the case was a .338 Lapua Magnum precision rifle, her third, the first 2 having been lost in theaters that didn't make the news. She'd built her relationship with this one over 2 years and 3 continents, and she knew its behavior at range better than most people knew their own names. At the quartermaster desk, a young petty officer processed her assignment slip without looking up. "Joint integration training, Lane 7. You're paired with SEAL 8 detachment." "Copy. They're already running range warm-ups if you want to." "I know where Lane 7 is." He looked up then, studied her face for a moment, the kind of study people did when they weren't sure if they'd heard the tone they thought they heard. She was already walking. She heard them before she saw them. SEAL 8's detachment ran hot. Not undisciplined, that would be unfair. They were among the most technically proficient combat units on the planet, and they knew it. The problem was they knew it the same way a sharp knife knows it's sharp, constantly and not quietly. Webb was the loudest of them. Big man, 36, built like something designed specifically to intimidate. 3 deployments to Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan, a Medal of Valor that he didn't wear on his uniform but referenced in conversation with the frequency of a man who needed you to know existed. He ran his team like a finely tuned engine and treated anything outside his team like a foreign object that might throw the pistons. Raines appeared at the entrance to Lane 7 during a brief lull in their drill cycle. She set her case down, began unlocking the clips, methodical, unhurried, while 14 operators oriented toward her with the subtle pack alertness of people who were trained to read new entries in their environment. Webb was the one who spoke. "Hey, sweetheart, what's your MLS?" Administrative support. The laughter was reflex. 14 people trained to read threat don't naturally laugh, but Webb had trained them to laugh at that particular kind of joke. The new arrival, the quiet one, the woman carrying a rifle in a world that still, in certain rooms, treated that as a category error. She didn't turn around, finished unlocking her case, lifted the weapon, ran a function check in the smooth sequence of someone who'd done it 10,000 times, and moved to the position at Lane 7's far end. Webb exchanged a look with his XO, Chief Petty Officer Garrett Holt, who had the decency to keep his expression neutral. "Probably here to observe protocol compliance," Webb said, still loud. "Make sure we're filling out our forms." Another laugh. Smaller this time. Holt watched Raines settle into the firing position and said nothing. Raines began shooting. The thing about a .338 Lapua Magnum at range is that it doesn't lie. You can bluff most things in a training environment. You can project authority you haven't fully earned, simulate expertise you're still building, sell confidence as a down payment on eventual competence. But when the rifle speaks, the target answers. And the answer is either where you intended or it isn't. Lane 7 ran targets at 400, 600, 800, and 1,000 meters. Standard warm-up for qualified operators was a 5-round group at each station, evaluating for consistency rather than precision, since consistency was what kept people alive when their hands were shaking from cold or exertion or fear. Raines fired her 400-meter group. 5 rounds. 1 hole. Webb noticed, but didn't say anything. 600 meters. Same result. 5 rounds grouped tight enough that a range safety officer walked down the lane to verify the target hadn't been swapped. It hadn't. 800 meters. She adjusted for wind. There was a crosswind shifting from the north that had been giving Webb's team trouble all morning, pushing rounds left at the longer stations by nearly 3 inches. Raines adjusted her scope with 2 clicks, settled, and put 5 rounds through the same point of aim. The range officer returned from checking the target. He looked at her, then at the target, then at Webb. "Chief," he said carefully, "you want to come look at this?" Webb walked down. He stood in front of the 800-meter target for a long moment. A single ragged hole where 5 rounds had passed through, stacked with the kind of grouping that wasn't luck, that was craft, practiced until it stopped being skill and became reflex. He walked back without speaking. Holt leaned toward him. "You know who she is?" "No." "You should probably find out." Webb's jaw tightened. He watched Raines prep for the 1,000-meter shot, adjusting her position by centimeters, reading the wind with her cheek before the scope touched her eye. Her body was perfectly still in the way that only comes from years of learning to separate heartbeats from trigger pull. She fired. At 1,000 meters, the round took just under a second to arrive. In that second, Webb's team had gone completely silent. The target report came back. Center mass. 1 centimeter off dead center. Raines rolled off the position, stood, and finally turned to face the group. "Staff Sergeant Dominique Raines," she said. "Army Special Forces. Designated marksman qualified. Long-range precision shooter qualified. Joint integration attachment. Your unit for the next 10 days. She looked at Webb directly. "And you are?" Webb opened his mouth and closed it. It was the first time in 4 years at Camp Ridgeline that anyone had seen Marcus Webb not have an immediate answer. "Master Sergeant Webb," Holt said carefully, when the silence had stretched past the comfortable point. Raines nodded. "Master Sergeant." The word landed without edge, without mockery, just weight. The weight of someone who had nothing to prove and therefore wasn't going to bother proving it. "I'll need a terrain brief before tomorrow's exercise. Whenever your team has time." She began breaking down her rifle. Nobody laughed. The tension didn't disappear. In Webb's world, tension didn't disappear. It just moved to lower ground and waited. Over the next 2 days, Raines went through integration exercises with the team in the way a foreign object goes through a system. Not hostile, not disruptive, just present in ways that created friction because her presence itself defied the shape of what the system expected. She was better than most of them at range. That was simply true, and truth didn't negotiate. The team's own designated marksman, Petty Officer First Class D'Angelo Osei, confirmed it the second day without being asked. "She's reading wind better than me," he told Holt, voice low, not complaining, just reporting. Holt gave him a look, then learned from her. "I tried. She's not explaining. She just does it. So watch." Osei did. Webb refused to ask. That was the thing about men like Webb. Their competence was real, but it was braided so tightly with pride that you couldn't pull one thread without the other coming apart. He watched Raines on the range from a professional distance and updated his internal assessment of her ability without updating his posture toward her. She noticed. Of course she noticed. She'd been reading people in hostile environments since before Webb had gotten his trident. But she didn't name it, didn't push, didn't bother pressing on a bruise that would heal or rupture on its own timeline. On the third night, in the mess tent, she sat alone with a topographic map spread across the table, tracing elevation lines with her finger. Osei sat down across from her without asking. "The northern approach," he said, nodding at the map. "Elevation drops sharply after the ridge. Wind behavior is going to be unpredictable in the channel." He studied the map. "You've been in terrain like this before." "Similar." She didn't elaborate. Osei was quiet for a moment. "Where'd you learn the wind calls?" "You're adjusting before the data comes in." She looked at him. He was younger than her by several years, serious face, eyes that asked things straight. She respected that. "Mosul," she said. "Then Kunduz. By the time I was in Cameroon, the environment teaches you, or it teaches you through your mistakes." He absorbed that. "Those aren't standard deployment rotations for Army integration." "No," she agreed. "They're not." He didn't push. Just sat with the information the way a good operator sits with terrain, respecting what it's showing you without trying to force it into a familiar shape. They spent another 40 minutes on the map together. When they were done, Osei understood three things. The northern approach was dangerous. Raines was carrying experience he hadn't factored into his assessment, and whoever had sent her here had done so for reasons that went beyond 10 days of joint training. He didn't mention any of it to Webb. Day 5. The live exercise. Ridgeline's integration training culminated in a simulated combat scenario. 2 teams, an objective building, a hostage scenario, a rescue timeline. Real weapons, training ammunition. Real stakes in the sense that your performance evaluated against lives in the field. The briefing happened at 0530. Raines and SEAL 8. Maps, time hacks, communication protocols. Webb ran the brief in the way he ran everything, with precision and the faint undertone of a man who believed efficiency was the same as authority. When he reached the sniper support role, he assigned it to Osei without looking at Raines. Osei glanced at her. She was watching the map. Holt cleared his throat. "Master Sergeant." "Osei has the marked position," Webb said, not looking up from the schematic. "Staff Sergeant Raines' range qualification is higher than." "Osei has the marked position." "Flat. Final." Raines said nothing. The exercise launched at 0700. For the first 18 minutes, it ran clean. The approach corridor to the objective was a broken series of ravines and high ground. Exactly the kind of terrain where elevation control made the difference between an operation and a recovery mission. Webb's team moved fast and low, executing the approach with the precision that made SEAL 8 what it was. Osei was positioned on the high ground with the radio link to the ground team, one eye through the scope. At the 1,500-meter mark from the objective, the scenario inserted the complication. In real training scenarios at Ridgeline, the range control team could introduce variables, simulated intelligence reports, unexpected hostile positions, electronic interference. What they introduced at minute 18 was a wind event, a gust pattern from the south that shifted the entire environmental picture at the longer ranges. Osei felt it, tried to compensate. His first 2 confirmation shots on the marked hostile positions, training rounds, evaluated by position sensors, came back off target. Not badly, but at 800 meters in a live engagement, not badly was the same as missed. "Confirm, Mark," came through on the radio. Webb's voice. "Controlled but tight." "Readjusting," Osei said. "Wind shift." "Time, petty officer." "I'm readjusting." The next shot came back off target again. The wind had shifted again, which wasn't supposed to happen according to the morning's weather briefing, but terrain channeled air in ways that briefing rooms couldn't fully predict. Raines was positioned on the opposite ridge as secondary observer, a role Webb had assigned with the barely concealed intention of keeping her out of the primary picture. She was watching Osei's impacts through her own scope, calculating. Her radio clicked. Holt was 200 meters below her on the slope. He pressed his earpiece. "Go." Winds funneling from the gap at grid 447. Osei's reference point is wrong. He needs to adjust right by 11 inches and drop half a mil. There's a thermal rising on the eastern face that's going to continue shifting the pattern for the next. She paused, watching the terrain. For minutes, then it'll stabilize. Holt related. Osei paused. Where's that coming from? Raines. Adjust and confirm. A beat. Then the sound of Osei making the adjustment. Adjusting right 11, dropping half mil. Next shot. Center mass. Position sensor confirmed. Following shot. Same. The pattern stabilized exactly as she'd said. 4 minutes, then clean air, consistent wind from the north. Webb's voice came over the radio. Lower now, the tight urgency drained out. Ground team advance. The exercise continued. That was when the scenario escalated beyond the script. Ridgeline's range control operated from a monitoring station at the top of the eastern ridge. At 0748, something in the scenario that was never supposed to happen, happened. One of the range's civilian contractors, a terrain specialist who'd been conducting a parallel infrastructure survey a kilometer outside the exercise boundary, triggered an unmarked legacy sensor buried in the hillside. A relic from a previous exercise cycle, improperly cleared from the registry. The sensor activated a set of pre-programmed range systems. Loudspeakers projecting simulated hostile comms, servo-operated pop-up target sequences, and a smoke deployment system designed to simulate a vehicle ambush. In a controlled environment, these would have been recognized immediately as exercise artifacts. But they activated inside the actual exercise corridor, and they activated simultaneously sound, smoke, and movement across 3 points of the ridge. To 14 SEAL operators in the middle of a live exercise, moving through unfamiliar terrain with weapons loaded with training ammunition, what happened next wasn't a mistake. It was chaos. Contact. Multiple voices at once, from multiple positions, each reporting from a different reference point. The ground team had gone to cover behind the ravine wall. 2 operators were already engaging the pop-up target sequence with training rounds. Webb was on the primary radio, demanding a situation report that 3 different people were trying to give him at the same time. Cease fire, cease fire. Range control was broadcasting, but in the electronic interference of the smoke environment and the volume of competing radio traffic, the message was fragmenting. Osei had swung his scope to the new contact points and was calling targets that weren't actually hostile. Couldn't tell the difference at 600 meters through smoke. And at the base of the ravine, 2 of Webb's operators had separated from the main body in the initial scatter and were now in a position with no line of sight to the team and no clear direction back. Dom Raines saw all of it. She saw the 2 separated operators, Petty Officers Callahan and Raines, pressed against the ravine wall 300 meters below her, trying to re-establish radio contact. She saw Osei swinging to a target sequence that, from her angle, was visibly mechanical. The servo rotation of a pop-up system had a specific signature that human movement didn't replicate. She saw the smoke pattern and recognized the deployment type. Training-grade chemical smoke, not combat ordnance. And she saw Webb, on the primary frequency, starting to lose the picture. Her radio clicked to the command channel. All elements, this is Raines. Stand by. There was a beat of pure silence on the channel. 14 operators, one of the most decorated SEAL detachments in the country, and a voice they'd spent 5 days treating as peripheral, standing by, because something in the tone told them to. Osei, the contact points at grid 447 and 453 are range assets. Servo-operated pop-up sequence. Pattern confirms. Do not engage. Acknowledge. A pause. Then Osei, confirmed. Standing down. Callahan, Raines, I have eyes on you. You are at the base of the ravine, 300 meters south of your team's position. Move north along the wall. There's a break in the rock face at 20 meters. Go through it. You'll have line of sight to Holt's position. Callahan's voice came back tight. Copy. How do you have eyes on us? That's not relevant right now. Move. A beat. Then the sound of movement. Ground team, she continued, voice steady as still water. The smoke is training grade. Not a threat source. Range control has malfunctioned. I'm attempting to re-establish their comms. Sit tight. She switched frequencies. Found a range control channel. which had been broadcast locked by the electronic interference, ran a bypass protocol, something that required knowing the override sequence for Ridgeline system architecture, something that was decidedly not in any standard operator brief. Range control, this is Raines. I'm applying channel bypass protocol 77 alpha. Do you copy? A burst of static. Then, Raines, we copy. System malfunction in sectors 4 through 7. We're trying to. I know. I have the picture. Give me 2 minutes and command override of the smoke system. Another pause. Then, override granted. You have control. She activated the shutdown sequence for the smoke deployment. The canisters cut off one by one, from east to west, like someone drawing a curtain back across the landscape. As the smoke cleared, the ridge came back into view. 2 operators moving through the rock face break. Osei with his rifle lowered, waiting. Webb's ground team coming back to their feet. The radio channel was silent, except for breathing. Raines spoke one final time. Sector clear. Range assets deactivated. Separated elements reintegrated. Recommend brief pause before continuing exercise. She paused. Master Sergeant Webb, your call. The silence that followed lasted 11 seconds. Holt counted. He was the kind of man who counted things, and he said later that those 11 seconds were the loudest 11 seconds he'd ever experienced on a training exercise, including the time a live mortar had misfired in Helmand Province. Webb stood at the ravine wall, weapon at low ready, smoke still dissipating from the terrain around him. Callahan and Reyes had just appeared through the rock face. Osei's voice was steady now, targets cleared. The chaos that had consumed the exercise 4 minutes ago had been collapsed into order by a voice on a radio that nobody had thought to route through the primary command net. His voice, when it came, was different, not smaller. Webb's voice was not capable of small, but the texture had changed. The performance was gone. All elements, tactical pause, hold current positions. He switched to the secondary channel. Raines, go ahead. How did you have override access to the range system? A beat. Classified. Another beat. How did you know the malfunction signature? I've seen it before. Where? Classified. He exhaled through his nose. The wind call you gave Osei at minute 18. Yes. That was a real-time environmental read at 800 meters through a channeling gap that wasn't in any of the briefing material. Correct. Where did you develop that capability? She was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet was not evasion, just the consideration of someone choosing how much to hand over. Conduce. Then 3 years in environments where the briefing material was either wrong or non-existent. You learn to read what's in front of you instead of what you were told to expect. Webb stood in the ravine. Around him, 14 of the best trained operators in the American military were pretending not to listen with the intensity of people listening very hard. That was good work, he said. The words came out like something he'd had to pull up from a deep place, not because they weren't true, but because saying them cost him something. That was very good work. Thank you, Master Sergeant. Another pause. When this exercise concludes, I'd like a debrief. Full picture, your background, your capability set, the override protocol. All of it. I'll have to make a call first. Classified. Classified, she confirmed. The channel clicked off. Osei was the first to speak on the ground team net, and he only said one thing. I need to buy Petty Officer Raines a coffee. Somewhere on the ridge, nobody said anything. But the laughter, when it came, was completely different from the laughter in Lane 7 on day 1. It was the kind of laughter that comes when a room exhales. The debrief lasted 3 hours. Not because Raines told them everything. She didn't. There were names and locations and specific operational details that were sealed behind clearance levels that Webb didn't hold and probably never would. But she told them enough. Enough for them to understand that the woman who had stepped out of transport van on a Tuesday with an unremarkable duffel and a hard-shell rifle case had spent 8 years operating in environments that most people in that room had never been cleared to know existed. 3 years with a joint special operations element that wasn't publicly affiliated with any branch. 18 months embedded with an allied coalition unit in West Africa, the only American in a 12-person team. 2 years attached to a counterproliferation task force that operated in places where uniforms were a liability and rank was a story you told in a safe house kitchen. The range override protocol she'd used, standard procedure for her last assignment. A unit that trained in facilities using the same Ridgeline system architecture and needed the ability to abort exercises on short notice without going through normal channels. She'd known where Callahan and Reyes were because she'd been tracking every member of the team's position from the ridge since the exercise began. Not because she was ordered to, because that's what she did. Situational awareness, so complete it had become involuntary. The same way a gifted musician hears chord changes without trying. Webb listened to all of it without interrupting. His XO, Holt, took notes in the precise shorthand of a man who'd spent 15 years in environments where information was currency. When she was done, Webb sat back. "I asked you a stupid question on day one," he said. "You asked a question that reflected an assumption. That's a polite way to put it. It's an accurate way to put it." He looked at her directly. The performance was completely gone now. Just a man looking at another operator and trying to see them clearly after 5 days of choosing not to. "You should have corrected me. It wasn't necessary. It was disrespectful." "Yes," she said. "It was." The bluntness of it landed clean. No anger attached to it. No invitation for drama. Just the truth, stated and accepted. "Why didn't you?" He stopped. Thought about what he was actually asking. Started again. "You could have said something." "I could have. But the exercise was coming, and the exercise was going to say it for me more clearly than anything I could have delivered through conversation." She paused. "I've been in rooms like yours before, Master Sergeant. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. But you are," she considered the word, "correctable. That matters." Holt looked like he wanted to write that down. "Correctable," Webb repeated. "You told Osei he had the mark position because you didn't want me in the primary role. That wasn't about capability. You knew by day 2 I was more accurate at range than most of your team. That's documented. It's on the range logs." She wasn't accusing, just stating. It was about something else. Webb's jaw worked. "I'm not asking for an apology," she continued. "I'm telling you what I observed because you asked for a full debrief, and I don't give partial ones. The decision you made with the mark assignment cost your team 4 minutes of clean operation during a critical window. In a real environment." She left the rest of it unsaid because the men in that room all knew what the rest of it was. Webb sat with it, the kind of sitting with it that was uncomfortable enough to mean it was working. Holt spoke quietly from the corner. The two separated operators. If Raines hadn't had eyes on them. "I know," Webb said. She put them back in the picture before they'd even realized how exposed. "I know, Holt." Silence. Then Webb looked at Raines. For the remaining 5 days. Full integration. Primary mark position. Tactical advisory role on approach planning. And he paused. And this one cost him more than the earlier words. "I'd like you to run the wind calls instruction for the whole team. Not just Osei." She studied him for a moment. "Not testing, just reading." "Agreed," she said. The next 5 days were different. Not comfortable. Integration never was, and real progress didn't come from comfort anyway. But different in the way that a room feels different when the architecture changes. The thing that had been bending the air between Raines and Webb's team resolved. Not into warmth, but into respect, which was sturdier. She ran the wind calls training the morning of day 6, and 14 SEAL operators sat and listened the way people listen when they know they're in the presence of something they can't afford to miss. She didn't lecture. She showed. Took them to the 800-meter lane, walked through the environmental read sequence, explained the terrain indicators that told her what the air was doing before the sensors confirmed it. Osei asked the most questions. Webb asked none, but his eyes never left the demonstration, and that night Holt saw him practicing the sequence alone on the South Range. On day 8, the second integrated exercise ran. Clean, fast, no malfunctions. Webb put Raines in the primary mark position and ran the ground team with the efficiency of an operator who'd updated his intelligence picture. When a genuine, unexpected variable entered the scenario, a target position that the briefing had mislocated by 150 meters, Raines called it with 9 seconds to spare and reoriented the ground team's approach before the error became a problem. Callahan, coming back through the rally point, caught her eye and gave her a nod. Nothing elaborate, just a nod of someone who hadn't forgotten. She returned it. On the final night, the team gathered in the mess tent for the debrief dinner that Ridgeline's integration program used to close the cycle. Webb sat at the head of the table. Raines sat in the middle, because that was where she'd been put, and she didn't rearrange hierarchies that weren't hers to arrange. Webb raised a water glass. This was a dry facility, Camp Ridgeline, and the table settled. 10 days, he said. Some of what happened in those 10 days was excellent. He paused. Some of it started as less than excellent and improved. He didn't look at Raines. He didn't need to. Everyone at the table knew what he meant, and the people who mattered knew he meant himself. Integration is only valuable if both parties come out changed. We're better. That's what the record should show. Glasses lifted. Raines lifted hers. Across the table, Holt caught her eye and gave the smallest possible nod. The kind that meant he'd been watching all of it from day one to this moment, and that some of what he'd watched had adjusted something fundamental in his understanding of how rooms like this one worked and who they should make space for. She received the nod without expression, which was her version of warmth. She left Camp Ridgeline on a Thursday, the same way she'd arrived. Transport van, regulation duffel, hardshell case. The checkpoint corporal who'd processed her arrival tried to make conversation. Good training cycle, Staff Sergeant. Productive, she said. SEAL, 8's a tough crew. They are. She reached for her documentation. They're also correctable. He didn't know what to do with that, so he handed back her paperwork and raised the gate. Raines stepped through. The van engine idled, waiting. Behind her, at lane 7, Webb's team was running final range qualification before their own dismissal. She could hear the shots, consistent, measured, the kind of groupings that spoke of technique being reinforced. One shot landed different from the others. Tighter, cleaner, with the kind of timing that meant someone was thinking about the wind before they touched the trigger. She didn't turn to see who it was. She didn't need to. She put her case in the van, climbed in after it, and looked straight ahead as the vehicle rolled through the gate and onto the highway toward the airfield. She had a flight to catch. Classified departure. Destination not printed on any manifest that base administration would ever see. The next place she was going would not have a comfortable range, clean weather briefings, or 14 operators who needed 5 days to learn to see her clearly. It would have terrain that lied, air that behaved unexpectedly, and situations where someone having eyes on something that nobody else was watching would mean the difference between people coming home and people not. She was good at that, had always been good at that. She just needed, for a while, to let the work say it. Would you have stayed quiet on day one, knowing the exercise would prove everything that needed proving? Or would you have answered the question in lane 7 and started the clock a different way? And do you think the most dangerous thing about being underestimated is that the person underestimating you never sees the correction coming? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. Hit that like button. Subscribe with the bell icon on. Share this story with someone who's ever been in a room that asked the wrong question and had to wait for the right moment to answer it. Your next story is already on the screen. Go watch it. We'll see you tomorrow.